All right, so good morning, everyone. Good morning from Geneva, Switzerland. My name is Daphne Zografos Johnson. I'm a legal officer in WIPO's Traditional Knowledge Division. And it is my great pleasure also on behalf of the Director of the Traditional Knowledge Division, Mr. Van Vendlen, to welcome you all to this webinar on intellectual property, opportunities for women entrepreneurs in Africa. So just before we start, just an admin note. This webinar is offered with interpretation in French and English, and I would like to invite you to select under interpretation at the bottom right of the screen the language you would like to listen to, English or French. Now, this interactive webinar today will offer practical information for women's business associations and their members in relation to intellectual property, including in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA. And this webinar is co-hosted by WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and the International Trade Center, the ITC, in particular, the SheTrades program in the AfCFTA project, which is funded by GIZ. Now, before we start on substance and on intellectual property, I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Svenja Osman and then Ms. Vanessa Erogbogbo to say a few introductory words. I'm going to briefly introduce them in a minute. But just to give you an idea of the rest of the program for this morning, then we will have Ms. Lara Kayode, who is going to give the main presentation on intellectual property. Then we'll give the floor to 3 representatives of African Business Women's Associations to share their experiences and to ask questions. And then we will open the floor to the audience for questions. Now, we're going to start with the introductory remarks. So first, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Svenja Osman from GIZ, who is the head of program support for this project. Svenja, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Daphne. Sorry, the connection was off just at the right moment, of course. I assume you gave the word over to us in Addis, right? Okay. So sorry for that. I will not turn on my video either because the video has been freezing several times. So I'm hoping that you can at least hear our opening speech. So good morning again to everybody. My name is Svenja Osman, and I'm the head of the regional AfCFTA support program based in Addis, but with locations in the REX and in 4 different focal countries. It is a pleasure to support this webinar today on intellectual property and the opportunities this can provide for women entrepreneurs all around Africa. Personally, I believe that this webinar will definitely offer practical training for Women Business Association and their members with respect to the vast questions that surround intellectual property, but especially including in the current context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, but also given the rather specific times at the moment due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it is a webinar that also arrives at a very early stage, given that the AfCFTA protocol on intellectual property rights will be negotiated as part of the phase 2 with the legal draft text that are going to be submitted soon, end of the year, beginning of 2021, I assume, for the adoption in the AU Assembly. This process as such must thus include a continent-wide overview of the current manner in which IPR is being addressed and what cooperation in the field of IPR amongst the business association, but also other stakeholders means. I think Women Business Association especially, but also other stakeholders should be a vital part of this dialogue and of the process of establishing the IPR protocol, which is why I do welcome this webinar exchange here today greatly. I also think that the negotiators could also profit from the work that has previously been done by the African regional economic communities and by dedicated African organizations that are already dealing with IPRs. I think there is an opportunity now to develop a systemic and comprehensive approach for blending in IPR issues into the building up of the fabric of the AfCFTA agenda. IPR as such has been a huge priority concern of African regional integration initiatives before, but is definitely for business organizations at the heart of fostering innovation. I think those participants here coming from business organizations know more than anybody of the public sector that the protection of ideas is key for businesses, and individuals could not reap the full benefits of their innovations if there is no protection and no focus on research and development. So looking ahead, how could the AfCFTA IPR protocol contribute to the aims of the AfCFTA, and specifically in light of business associations? What is the significance of the fact that Article 4, for instance, which looks at the AfCFTA's agreement, says that for the purposes of fulfilling and realizing the objectives of the AfCFTA,
I think we lost the audio. All right, so we'll see if Svenja manages to join us again. I think the connection is lost, unfortunately, but you know, I think we got most of Svenja's important message, fortunately. So before we start now with the substantive presentation, I would also like to give the floor to Ms. Vanessa Erogbogbo, who is the Chief of Sustainable and Inclusive Value Chains at the International Trade Center and a member of the Management Action Group. Now, Vanessa has over 20 years of experience in private sector development, and she oversees the ITC's work on sustainable value chains and trade and gender encompassing the Trade for Sustainable Development Program, which powers SMEs for a sustainable future, and also very importantly, the SheTrades initiative, which is connecting 3 million women and that's like quite a number, to market by 2021. So Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Daphne, for that introduction. And it's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces on the webinar this morning. A warm welcome to all of you to today's webinar from ITC. Let me start by thanking WIPO for co-hosting this event with us, and GIZ for supporting this initiative as part of a broader ITC-led program of gender mainstreaming in the AfCFTA. Now more than ever, intellectual property rights play a critical role in shaping business competitiveness. We live in a globalized economy, which is increasingly knowledge-based, digitalized, interconnected. The value of intangible assets is what sets a business apart. And intellectual property rights, such as brands and patents, have become ever more important to protect innovations, position a business in national, regional, and global markets, attract investors, and access new partnerships and markets. And yet we've seen that the uptake of IPR in Africa remains low. SheTrades recently conducted a survey of women's business associations, and the survey aimed to better understand how they engage with the AfCFTA processes, how they've been impacted by COVID-19, and what their capacity building needs would be. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank many of you who participated in the survey. The results were really telling. Only 50% of the business associations, I'm trying to hurry because I know I can see Daphne looking at her watch, and then I don't speak so clearly. Only 50% of the business associations reported that their members see registering intellectual property rights as a priority. And 50% of the business associations estimated that their members mostly do not hold any IPR. And for those that do, trademarks were the most common IP, designs, trade secrets, and patents are rare. More than half of the business associations identify low awareness of intellectual property rights as the main barrier. And 1/3 of the respondents point to the high cost of registering or enforcing IP rights. At SheTrades, we build women's skills. We help them add value to their products and services. We prepare them to meet and formalize deals with new investors, and we create unique opportunities for networking, sharing of good practices, and access to role models and mentors. This joint webinar is the first of a series of collaborative activities to help women leverage IP for their business competitiveness. As I said at the start, we're doing this through the support of GIZ, where we're working to help women entrepreneurs and their associations ensure that they can capitalize on the AfCFTA. And as we know, the AfCFTA is expected to boost regional trade by 52%, so it's an incredibly important opportunity for women entrepreneurs. Negotiations on the intellectual property rights protocol in the AfCFTA are ongoing, and we believe that this is a really important time to engage women entrepreneurs in two ways. Firstly, by supporting their competitiveness on IP matters, and second, by supporting women business associations to identify their priorities and to take an active part in the AfCFTA negotiations and implementation. In 2019, we worked with women business associations to develop recommendations on phase 1 issues on trade in goods and services, and we're now moving to phase 2 issues, including investment, IP, and competition policy. Through this process, women's business associations will share their priorities and their recommendations with trade ministers. So we hope that through this webinar, we can spark productive discussions. WIPO, Ms. Kayode, and business associations will share knowledge, experience, and I'm sure it's going to be a really exciting time together. I'm pleased to hand the floor back over to you, Daphne, to kick off the important discussion. Thank you, and do enjoy the webinar.
Many thanks, Vanessa, and also thank you for sharing with us the results of the questionnaires that were distributed to women's business associations, especially the results on the IP questions. And I think that indeed it will be a good awareness raising opportunity on IP issues, and Ms. Kayode's presentation now really comes at the right time. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Lara Kayode. So Lara is the founder and the managing partner of the law firm Okayode & Co., which is based in Lagos, Nigeria. And it is a firm, her firm covers both corporate and commercial matters, with a particular emphasis on industrial and intellectual property, as well as alternative dispute resolution and a specific interest in mediation. Now, Lara has studied in the UK at the University of Buckingham and Queen Mary University, where she got an LLM in intellectual property, and she was also admitted as a solicitor and the barrister of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. She's recognized as one of Nigeria's leading trademark practitioners, and her firm manages portfolios of trademarks, patents, and designs for both domestic and international clients. Lara has also developed a growing enforcement department and has successfully handled counterfeiting cases defending a number of world-famous brands. In the past few years, Lara has also developed relationships with other firms in African countries, in particular Kenya, South Africa, Cape Verde, Ghana, and Sierra Leone, amongst many others. And she is also an accredited mediator and an active and former board member of INTA, which is the International Trademark Organization. And she was actually awarded the INTA's President Award in 2019. Now, with this introduction, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Lara for a presentation on IP and the opportunities for women entrepreneurs in Africa.
Thank you, Daphne. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone. Thank you, ITC, WIPO, and the GIZ for inviting me to take this I'm very passionate about women entrepreneurs. So to do this, I really count it as an honor. And I'm hoping that, we'll be able to get some work done as quickly as possible in the short time that I have. So I'll start now by sharing my screen and my presentation. Excellent. Can you see it? Is it good? Yes? Okay. So you've heard about the firm. That's what I practice intellectual property law in Nigeria. I've done so for many years now, and it's a passion of mine. I thoroughly enjoy what I do. Today we're going to be talking about the opportunities available to women entrepreneurs in Africa, and as you can see, I am growing to be a social media person. So I've been advised that it's good to have some presence on there. So I'd really love to hear from you, attendees, if you please follow me on these various social media handles. Now, AfCFTA, I don't want to belabor the issue. We've heard from the previous speakers about the importance of this free trade area, the importance of this agreement, and phase 2 really is what concerns us. If I'm going too fast, please let me know, because I know this is being interpreted, yes? Am I good? Okay. So we're going to head towards phase 2 of the discussions which concern intellectual property. And pretty much everyone signed on the continent to the agreement. However, only 30 have ratified, as at, I think, May or July this year. So that's something to be conscious of as a woman entrepreneur on the continent. If we sign up, we've signed up already. So for instance, my nation has signed up. I'm an entrepreneur here. How does this affect me? What's this IP anyway? What are we talking about? I heard the statistics that Vanessa shared with us. 50% of the participants don't hold IP rights. But I'm sure that 50% actually do business. So what do I get from it? These are questions we get in practice. So when I speak with entrepreneurs, especially MSMEs and SMEs on the continent, I get, what's the big deal? It's mine. Do I need to register this? It's mine. Why do I bother? How long do I have protection for? How do I enforce this right? Vanessa mentioned the cost of enforcement, cost of registration, cost of enforcement. These can be deterrents to IP right holders. So we asked ourselves these questions as we were preparing. Like, okay, so I'm an entrepreneur. I'm asking these questions. What do you get from it? Quite a lot. It's your property. You know, I know we say, when I started my practice and I would talk about, I practice intellectual property law, I'd have people say to me, oh, okay, so you sell property, real estate. And I'm saying, no, I don't do real estate. What do you do? Property of the mind. And then, what is property of the mind? What's that? Oh, it's just, and they'd wash it off. I mean, this is 30 years ago. And now we are more aware. Now we need to negotiate. Now we realize that IP is actually an asset. Intellectual property is an asset. So I ask, why should this be a primary focus for an entrepreneur? What's in it for you? It's your asset. That's what's in it for you. We did some research and we looked at various areas on the continent. So in Nigeria, where I live and work, there's prime property in a part of Lagos. It's probably per square meter, very expensive. It's in Ikoyi. If I buy that property, the first thing I do is ensure that I protect it. I get a documentation from the lands registry. I ensure assignments that need to be done are done. And more than likely, I put a fence over it, across it, if I'm not ready to build yet. But with intellectual property, with business women, I find that we just take it for granted that, oh, come on, it's mine. I don't have to, it's going to cost me too much to do this at the beginning, or I can do this later when I become famous. Well, the news I have for you is if you wait till you become popular, then more than likely you're fighting to keep your right rather than protecting your right. So I would say, from the get-go, begin to look at intellectual property and the protection of these rights. So we had some fun in my office looking at different types of entrepreneurs. So we're looking. We have the seamstress, the fashion cluster. We have the young lady who's really running her world from her computer. We have a farmer. And in the 21st century, it's no longer just being a doctor, a lawyer, all of that. We have a significant number of women in agriculture across the continent. They have been forever, but now they're more organized. So we have the professor. Because of COVID, probably she's had to develop some programs that she's teaching online. So she's not been able to go into class. She may have engaged some people to write some software for her. It's her idea. She needs protection. I have the musician. Somebody writes, somebody plays, somebody sings. I have the pharmacist. Or a doctor, or a pharmacist, or a nurse. With COVID-19, we see the development of, we're still scrambling to find a vaccine. So, pharmaceutical industry. We have the fashionista. she's, or the makeup artist. In my country, this is a huge industry. And they're very creative. So she's a creative lady. She also has intellectual property rights. And of course, come on, the average, as we know, food and beverages, we know how to do it and we do it well in Africa. So do these women have intellectual property rights? Do they have intellectual property in the first place? Do they know that they have intellectual property? And what are they doing with that intellectual property, if anything at all? So what's intellectual property? I hope our French translation is correct. We tried to make it more African, French and English. So there are different types of intellectual property. And so you will get the copyright, the geographical indications or appellation of origins, trade secrets, which Vanessa mentioned that is not quite popular, plant varieties, patents, industrial designs, trade dress, utility models, and the king. I think most people will say, well, everyone has a trademark. Everyone knows what a trademark is. So what are these rights? Do you own any of them? How do you protect them? How do you begin to identify them? What qualifies your name, for instance, to become a trademark? These are the things that hopefully would look at today. Something that I wanted to mention was, how do we register? National registration, international registrations. What are trade secrets? We know of a famous beverage company that we understand that there's a secret formula. That secret formula, I understand, I don't have it on fact, but that the 2 or 3 people who know it do not travel together. And I'm sure you know who this is. I will not mention any names. So I see that Daphne's, she's smiling, so I know. So this trade secret, I wonder, as a businesswoman, do you have a trade secret that is worth protecting for hundreds and hundreds of years? That's something to look at. Geographical indications. What is a geographical indication? It's something that identifies a product or a service with a particular area. There are beverages that that come from a particular region, and I wish we could do a poll and see if people could guess, but we don't have the time. They come from a particular region, and if that beverage does not come from alcoholic beverage, is not from that region, it's difficult for you to call it by that name. So I wonder, in our various countries on the continent, if there are particular foods, for instance, where I come from, that are identified with particular regions. So I wonder if there are any rights there to look at. Copyright. What is copyright? The minute you write your name down, you have copyright in it. Are my ideas protected? No, they're not. Expression of your idea, yes, that is what the law will protect. We'll talk to that later. Industrial designs. What are these industrial designs? Patents, plant varieties, seedlings, seeds. Do they get protection? Do we have intellectual property over those? Trade dress, the way my product looks, the shape, the color that you identify with my service or my product. Utility models, what are these? As I mentioned earlier, registration. How do we go about registration? Also, I've identified my right. A national registration is possible. WIPO, we have the Madrid system, is an international system, covers, I believe, 117 countries, if not more. One registration covers these countries. OAPI covers French-speaking West Africa. Africa, not just West Africa, because I know Morocco, Comoros is part of this union. One application covers these countries. In IRIPO, we have the English registrations, the CTM. Why have I put that there? I'm thinking that my African sisters, businesswomen, are looking not just to conquer Africa, but also to look across the pond, as we say. And for patents, you talk about the PCT. So, trademarks. I always like to start with trademarks. I love trademarks. I'm passionate about trademarks. What is a trademark? A trademark is a sign. It's a logo. It's a name that you attach to your service or your product. Let's talk about trademarks before we talk about service marks. What is protectable? So I have questions like, is my name protectable? An acronym, my children's names, what can you, the key factor, the key that you must bear in mind when you want to protect your trademark is it distinctive? Is it capable of distinguishing my product from somebody else's product? Nobody has a monopoly on any product. In my country, like everywhere, we have bottled water. Water is water. It may come from source, it may be distilled water, but it comes in a particular getup. So it looks a particular way, it has a brand. What is it that's going to distinguish your mark, your product from somebody else's? Bear that in mind. What is the duration of this protection? It depends on where you are. If you register under OAPI, under Madrid, 10 years, and then renewable every 10 years. If you register in Nigeria, we haven't signed up to any of those agreements. It's 7 years initially, and then you get a 14-year renewal in perpetuity. So really, if you maintain your mark, it's something you own. It's like your house. It's like your land. It's like the property you buy. It's yours. You protect it. You look after it. Is registration required? It's best for you to register. Then when you do have challenges, because they say to you, copying is the highest form of flattery. I think that's what they say, but sometimes intellectual property is not, especially when it's a standard product. So do you need to register? Yes, you do. It's best for you to do so. Then you have your right. You have a document. If you use before registration in common law jurisdictions, then you also have a right, which is protected by common law. Under what do I register this thing? Under national legislation or international registrations. How do I find out which one is beneficial to me? That's where you need the expert. And trademarks are so important. When Vanessa was speaking, she said, the trademarks are most popular. Yes, but you find that a lot of trademarks are actually not registrable, or they're filed and then, not protected. You have to see it. It's a journey. See it to the end. Try to see it to the end. It's an initial investment, but see it, as I say, as your prime property that in some countries, intellectual property is used as collateral to obtain finance. I believe we will get there. We're not there yet, but we will get there. So, trademarks. Okay, so mine is not a product. I hear you say, okay, so I render a service. It's an intangible service. So do I not get protection? Of course you do. You get a service mark. The same key, the same standard that we use for the trademark, we also use for the service mark. Is it distinctive? Can it distinguish your service from that of another? How long is it for? Same as the trademark. Is registration required? Please, for your benefit, yes. Of course. Check your national legislation. Check out international registrations. If AfCFTA comes into play, Africa becomes the largest trading zone under the WTO. So it's no longer, I'm importing from here to another continent. Your continent is your market. 1.3, I think last count, 1.3 billion people, huge. That's a huge market. So you don't want to be caught unawares. You don't want to be caught without your brand name, your trademark, your service mark protected in this huge market that's opening up. My country, in Nigeria, there are 200 million of us. That's already a huge market. So imagine being a businesswoman in this country and being able to go across. How am I doing for time? Okay. Right. So we have a lot to cover. Trade dress. What is trade dress? So there's a way in which your product appears, your service is represented. It may be a particular color. It may be a particular design. It may be the design of a building, for instance. Your buildings may be built in a particular way that the minute I see your building, I know that this building belongs to this business. So this trade dress, how do we do that in Africa? Most countries actually on the continent do not protect trademarks per se. However, if you had a color in Nigeria, for instance, whilst you can't claim that color, you can, or a design, you name your trademark and device. Trademark and device. So it becomes part of your, so when we're negotiating, these are things that we should bear in mind. The loopholes that we have currently in our law that may benefit us, perhaps it's time to put that on the table, put it at the back of our minds as we begin to carry out our negotiations in phase 2. Is registration required? Most countries know you will have to go through not IP law, so perhaps it's something we begin to discuss. Do we want to protect trade dress on the continent in various countries? Is it to our benefit that we do so? Patents. What is a patent? A patent, I've heard many people say to me, I want to patent my trademark. And I'm like, no, you can't. You can't patent your trademark. What you do, you patent. To obtain a patent, you have to have an invention. It has to be new. It has to be novel. It has to be something that either an improvement on the existing or it's never been done before. Duration, 20 years. If you go through the PCT route, you have 3 years, 30 months, within which you are able to still claim your priority. 20 years for a monopoly, because that's what you get. But with that monopoly, you can create so many other avenues. If you have imagine if somebody is able to find this vaccine. So a new invention arises, licenses go along, they go out. So you can earn on your investment. Is registration required? Yes. Under national legislation, yes. And then, as I mentioned earlier in my international registrations, the PCT, that if your country is a signatory to that, you can also benefit from that. I'm talking about utility models because we have that in WIPO and WIPO. So in some jurisdictions, they're called petty patents. So it's not as stringent, the requirements are not as stringent as the patents are, and the duration is for a shorter time. So it's 6 to 10 years. And what is protectable? An improvement on what exists already. Do you register this? Yes. It's advisable that you do. So begin to think about what you're doing. I think a lot of the business women, traditionally we start our businesses from home, maybe a hobby that becomes a business, but bear these rights in your mind, bear them at the back of your mind as you conduct your businesses, as you talk to partners, as you negotiate with people who are working for you, who are helping you develop your business model. Begin to think about the rights that you may have as these conversations are going on. And copyright. Copyright, you have different types of copyright. You have literary, artistic, musical works, and then you have rights that come up from sound and broadcasting, and cinematograph films. that is what is protectable. Ideas, like I said earlier, are not. So we all have ideas. What are you doing with your idea? A lot of us will have boxes, oodles and oodles of ideas. But what are we doing with those ideas? The expression is what the law recognizes. The expression is what the law will protect. So the copyright, just because it has to be placed on a medium for you to get protection. And I'm not going to go in too much into copyright because I know we'll discuss, we have a discussion later about the various rights. International agreements, there's so many of them that exist. I think copyright is quite progressive because, as you know, technology is advancing. So innovation is also something we need to bear in mind. There are many innovators, technological innovators, even within women business associations. Industrial designs are protectable. Duration, it depends on where you are. In Nigeria, we have a 15, I beg your pardon, I don't want to go there yet. We have industrial designs. We have what is protectable. So it has to be something that adds aesthetic quality to your product, if that makes sense. In Nigeria, we have duration is 15 years, at 5 years interval renewals. Yes, please register. For everything, you know, I know you keep saying, oh, it's going to cost so much money. Yes, but it's basically, see it as an investment. And I hear somebody asking me, so what if I don't use that design? What if you do? What if you do? You know, going back to that plot of land, if you don't fence it, squatters come in, they take over, they use it, and after a while, you spend more money trying to get your property back than you would have if you protected it in the first place. And I'm trying to see. Okay, so remember we had the lady on my pictures who the plant varieties would be relevant to. She's a farmer. There's very little protection through IP on PVRs on the continent. I think this should be something to be discussed. Africa is green, is agrarian. There's so much that is going on the continent that I think my farming ladies, the farmers, and their families who, their generations of farmers who traditionally were initially men and then the daughters have taken over, I think you need to bear this in mind. The seedlings that are discovered, what do you do with them? Do you have a right to them? Yes, you do. Do we need to talk about it? Yes, we need to have that conversation. Trade secrets. I'm conscious of time. Daphne, how much time do I have?
We don't want to cut you short, Lara.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, no, please proceed.
Thank you. Okay, so trade secrets. What is a trade secret? I mentioned it earlier in the introduction. It's something that is valuable. In fact, it's invaluable. It's the essence of your business. Unfortunately, this is not directly protected under IP. There are various arguments for and against. There are people who will say, well, you're protecting a trade secret and we don't really know what's in this trade secret. It may be toxic, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? If it's valuable, if you've taken the pains to develop something, we deserve to have protection for it. Is registration required? It would be nice, but this registration, be careful, because if we argue for registration, it means it comes into the public domain. So there may be other ways in which to protect your trade secrets. So when arguing for protection of everything, it's important to know that the minute it's protected, it becomes sort of unprotected because then it's in the public domain. I mentioned this earlier. Very few countries actually have any protection for this on the continent. I believe, I don't want to guess. So I think we should begin to look at this seriously as a nation. I speak for my country, and also as a continent. We're not going to prevent people from using our products, but do we get some recognition? Do we get a right? Do we get something to protect? Yes. In Nigeria, there's a meal that we get out of cassava. I'm not going to go into the jollof rice argument. No, I don't want to talk about that because I don't want to get into trouble. But the cassava comes from a particular region in southwestern part of Nigeria. There's something about the cassava that grows there that makes it different from anywhere else. Does that tribe, that community, do they have a right to have that protected? Or can anyone just maybe modify this product and then call it that name? Because the expectation of the consumer, what IP does, even though we think, oh, we're protecting, I'm trying to protect myself, we're looking out for the consumer. So the consumer walks up and picks something up, expecting something, and is disappointed. So that's the workings of a trademark. So you find that there's no right that stands alone. Most of the time, they work in tandem with one another. So what is protectable? Let's look at it as a continent. What do we want to protect? What do we want to keep African? What is African that we want to keep African? What is African that when it travels across to other continents is identified as African and it is actually what we say it is? Conversations. So we said, can ideas be protected? No. Expression of ideas, yes. So what the law protects is the effort you put into putting your name together. Can I use your name? It's your name. But remember, if your name is a common name, if your name is Lara, is not so common. My full name is Omalara. You don't get that name as much anymore as when I was younger. But if your name is James Smith and you have a brand called James Smith, well, you know, if every other James Smith decides they're going to do that, then it's going to be a bit difficult for you to get that protection. You're not distinctive. Can I use my company name? Yes, but don't you want to separate that? You may decide that you want to use your company name, that's fine. But do you want something distinctive? Is that the only product you're going to be making? Is that the only service you provide? So these are questions I'd like us to think about as we go along. Help, I've started to sell. Advertise my products and services. What do I do? I've already started. Okay, where are you? Are you in a common law jurisdiction? Okay, so you have common law protection. Are you somewhere where registration is important? Yes, then I would say, please, as quickly as possible, get cracking. Go register your mark. If it's a trademark, if it's a service mark, if it's a patent, please. If it's an invention, please. Don't start to do anything before you protect it. The minute you accept, you're going through the PCT. The minute you let it out of a bag, it's out of a bag, and that's it. Novelty. The novelty requirement is gone. if I register in my country, am I protected in the rest of Africa? So currently, no. Trademarks are territorial. That's why we have all sorts of international agreements. If I register under Madrid, I'm covered in those 117 countries, subject to examination by local offices and all of that, for sure. If I register under WIPO, yes, I'm protected there, but Nigeria is not a member of WIPO. Does that mean, no, you're not protected here? You have to have national registration. When AfCFTA negotiates our IP protocol, IP policy, then we will see what we get. So is that going to be one African registration? I don't know. How do we, as a business association, get a seat at the table of negotiations for your members? I think you just need to make not white noise, as much noise, relevant noise, to the negotiators. As was mentioned earlier, a lot of negotiations have taken place already. There are lots of policies, a lot of work has been done to this unified IP policy. So, engagement. Relevant engagement. Get your foot in the door, get a seat at the table, take a seat, and please speak to your owners, encourage the brand owners, encourage the business association members to look into having their IP rights protected. It's property. It is property. Where do you begin to start? Start at the beginning. The minute you decide, I want to go public with it, even if you're only selling at your daughter's school, at your son's school, or you're only supplying to a particular business, or you're in talks with, a lot of times we think we have to start big. Little acorns become oak trees. The minute you begin to think of this business, add IP to your plan. IP protection is key. That's it. I hope, I know that I try to put everything together. My slides are available. We can share that. I can also share my notes if that would help. But I honestly do think that we need to begin to have those conversations from the tiny cluster to the huge organization. I will not attempt to speak French, but I will thank you for your kind attention.
Dear Lara, many, many thanks for your presentation. I think it's not an easy job to give an overview of all of the intellectual property rights in such a short amount of time, and to really give an understanding of the opportunities with each of these IP rights. And I think that you managed to really do a great job. So thank you so much for that. And before we move to the experiences of women's business associations and their members, I would just like to let our participants know that they're very welcome to ask questions in the Q&A section of the screen at the bottom. And some of you already started asking questions, so I do hope that we'll have time to get to those, at least some of them. All right, so now the next section of our webinar will give the floor to three wonderful women, and we're very pleased that they were available to join us today. So Ms. Korkor Kujo, Ms. Candide Legued, and Ms. Fania Razaka Boana. So I will perhaps briefly introduce each of you now, and then I will give you the floor for perhaps 5 to 7 minutes each. And what we'd like to hear from you is really the experiences of your members with intellectual property rights. And if you have any specific questions that you then want to ask Lara, or if you have any specific comments that you would like to share with our audience. So to briefly introduce our speakers, because they have all amazing careers and backgrounds, and really we need to acknowledge that and say a few words about them. So Korkor Kujo, who's a technical advisor, Women Economic and Social Advancement Program at the Graca Machel Trust. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Graca Machel Trust, thank you, yeah.
Graca Machel Trust, thank you. So Korkor started her career as an entrepreneur herself with 15 years of experience, and then she transited into the development sector 18 years ago and has supported flagship entrepreneurship programs with South African-based organizations. Now, over the past 5 years, she has had the role of Women Economic and Social Advancement Program Manager at the Trust, and she facilitated network building, supporting coalition of women in finance, agribusiness, and business federation, and advanced gender equality. She designed a number of impressive leadership programs, and these initiatives have helped to increase women's ability to influence greater gender equality and enhance skills and confidence to lead in business. She is also a coach of self-healing, leadership, and business. So this will be our first speaker. Then we will have Ms. Candide Legued. Welcome, Candide. And perhaps I could take this opportunity to introduce her in French. Alors, Candide a un nombre de domaines d'expertise: planification, gestion et évaluation des programmes de développement, stratégie financière des collectivités locales. Candide est une juriste des affaires spécialisée dans le management et l'accompagnement des jeunes entreprises. C'est la présidente de la Fédération des femmes entrepreneurs et femmes d'affaires de la CEDEAO et spécialiste genre et développement, promotion de l'entrepreneuriat féminin au Togo et dans la sous-région ouest africaine. Et elle est également la fondatrice et coordinatrice nationale du Centre entrepreneurial des femmes d'affaires du Togo, INNOVAP, qui est le premier incubateur de start-up féminines au Togo. Et finalement, nous avons Madame Fania Razaka Boana, qui est la présidente du groupement des femmes entrepreneurs de Madagascar. Et donc Fania a également un parcours très impressionnant. Elle est femme entrepreneur elle-même dans différents secteurs d'activité avec 15 ans d'expérience. Elle est la présidente cofondatrice du groupement des femmes entrepreneurs de Madagascar, commissaire régionale pour affaires australes à la FCEM, ça c'est les femmes chefs d'entreprise mondiales. Elle est vice-présidente de l'association des réseaux de femmes entrepreneurs francophones, ainsi que de la Chambre de commerce d'industrie d'Antananarivo. C'est la présidente d'honneur de l'Association des femmes handicapées de Madagascar et cofondatrice du Conseil national des femmes de Madagascar, et elle est engagée depuis plusieurs années dans les responsabilités citoyennes et économiques. Elle a été nominée puis élue parmi les femmes les plus influentes de Madagascar sur la lutte contre la violence à l'égard des femmes, et elle contribue également activement à un développement inclusif. Donc voilà, bienvenue, welcome to you all. And I would like to then give the floor to our first speaker, Korkor, for her contribution.
Thank you, Daphne. Thanks, Lara and Vanessa, for your presentations as well. It was very illuminating. And so mine, I thought, would be just useful to just share maybe some case studies around some of the experiences that we've had. And the experiences that I want to speak to is based on the fact that the Graca Machel Trust, one of our biggest work is really around, for the Women Economic and Social Advancement Program, is to strengthen and amplify women's movements across the continent. So we do work with business associations. We also run a program called Women Creating Wealth, which has now been implemented in 4 countries, Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania, and now in South Africa. And I think it's from those programs that I really want to share some of the experiences around intellectual property. I think everything that, the research that Vanessa just shared is brilliant, because it really does speak to what our experiences has been. That intellectual property generally is not, especially with the business associations or women entrepreneurs that we work with. This program, Women Creating Wealth, has 400 entrepreneurs. So just based on that, our understanding certainly in Malawi, Tanzania, and Zambia is that intellectual property is not very big on a lot of our women, business women's agenda. What is interesting for me is noting that in South Africa, of the 4 countries, intellectual property does matter to a lot of the entrepreneurs there. And I'm seeing that there's a correlation between the standards of trade in the country. So if the country has very high standards in terms of products and is regulated, there seems to be a very strong interest of the entrepreneurs to align with that. In the same way, Malawi will say, well, you know what, we're not really, it's not a big feature for us right now, because our Bureau of Standards is not as strong. And actually, the stronger they get, the more this issue will become very important for us, for our women to start paying attention to it. And it will be the same with, say, Zambia, and I would say Tanzania as well. I would like to say that South Africa has, because it has a stronger and a bigger formal economy, as it were. The government and actually the SME support interventions, or SME, the South African Small Enterprise Development Agency, for instance, has really created provision. Firstly, for entrepreneurs, to support entrepreneurs to register their intellectual properties, but it also is now providing some funding towards that, because often the problem has been, yes, awareness is an issue, and an expense of it is an issue. So in countries where the governments actually recognize this and they make sure that they're actually putting some funding contribution towards that, it really encourages the entrepreneurs to be able to do that, because I think, as Lara said, it is expensive, and in the midst of all the entrepreneurs' priorities, and also not probably seeing the long-term vision of their businesses, they may deprioritize registration, because they think, well, right now I've got to get my bread and butter in place, and who knows? And also because if it's not a big issue in your country, you may be able to wing it for a long time until it becomes a problem. Now, the problem happens in various ways. One is, a lot of countries take their entrepreneurs into exhibitions, right? Now, when you go to exhibitions and you are not properly registered, you can come into trouble. As Lara said, we are now, becoming this Africa's market with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is opening up more and more. So if you go to exhibition in China or even in other African countries, and your intellectual property is not registered, and it's not just registered in your country, but it has to be internationally registered, right? So we know of an entrepreneur who has had the last 3 years battling to get her intellectual property back in China, because she went on a government exhibitions where she wasn't properly protected. And so she's had to take on a very expensive trip of really making sure that she claims it back. And you don't want to have to experience that, because that's really challenging. I think there's another example of entrepreneurs who will supply to big organizations, their products to big organizations. And often because of cash flow issues, they are not able to, keep the supply in the quantities that the business owner would want. So you'll find that they'll then go and start to produce your product because you're not able to supply the demand. And they see that it's really, really popular. So what happens, in one case that we know, this the business owner who was supplied this product went to the entrepreneurs to say, can we go into partnership? And she said no. And when she said no, he just went and, you know, just produced her product. And so now she's having to compete with him for her product because she hadn't properly trademarked it. She's now gone through a lot of lengths to make sure that she distinguishes herself through the colors and through bolding her name, etc., to be able to come back into the market. But what is interesting is also this idea of trade secrets. Trade secrets, from my experience, is really where a lot of the women entrepreneurs are actually finding it's important to do that, because when standards matter, it means that you need to say what is in your product. You can't go to, you can't trade in South Africa, for instance, with a nameless, ingredient-less product. You have to label, you have to say what is in there because it's a requirement, it's a standard requirement. And therefore, trade secret becomes really important that our women register trade secrets. The good thing about trade secrets is you just have to say what the products are, what the ingredients are, but you don't have to give away your formula, right? So this is where this woman whose business is almost taken over by the person that she supplied was able to get her competitive advantage back because, you know, because she has a trade secret, the way she combines her ingredient to produce this product still sets her apart. But one thing she also says is that, you know, even if you have the trademark, you still have to keep improving your game. You can't say, here's my brand and that is enough. The product must sell itself because of the quality and the taste and all the experience that the entrepreneur, the customer also needs to experience. So I think you can't just say the trademark is enough. Really keeping on product development, etc., is critical. The last one that I want to give in terms of example is around, is actually to that last point, is that yes, you can get your trademark out there, but I think before you make a lot of noise around it, you need to make sure that you can support the claims that it says it delivers on. Because if you can't support the claims, right, and use it as a brand to drive your brand positioning, sooner or later, even the name will not protect you. And also, so for that reason, you need to probably keep your head down in terms of advertising. I think it's important to secure the name and protect it, but you need to keep your head down in terms of advertising until you have proved all the claims and all the support that makes your product legitimate, right? Otherwise, sooner or later, it will become a problem that you will have to be, because if somebody is able to go faster on doing the research and making the claim, they could just as well, you know, have a really nice brand and take over your product and you will become irrelevant. So it's important that you take time and not make too much noise whilst you're still doing your claims, so that you can support your claims when your competitors catch up with you. And with that, I would end here and hand over to my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Coco, for sharing these thoughts and these very important comments. I see that Candide is back with us. I think you had some connection problems, so I think we'll take advantage that you're here with us now, just to make sure that we don't have other problems, and give you the floor.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Moi, je vais parler en français. Bon, alors, je ne sais pas, je n'ai pas suivi la fin de la présentation de Lara, mais ce que je voudrais ajouter ici, c'est que ce soit Lara ou bien Vanessa, toutes les deux ont parlé des difficultés que les femmes entrepreneurs ont à enregistrer soit leur brevet ou leur marque, ou même les noms commerciaux. Donc, je crois que le problème est un peu partout le même. Et ici, au Togo, je me suis amusée à aller sur Internet et j'ai remarqué qu'il est dit quelque part qu'il y a un rapport qui dit que les femmes togolaises sont les premières au monde à enregistrer leur invention. Et donc, je suis allée dans le bureau qui s'occupe de l'enregistrement. Et ce que j'ai pu constater, c'est que en vérité, on a comment dirais-je, des données, mais qui ne sont pas agrégées par sexe. Donc, si je peux vous dire, c'est que pour ce qui concerne le brevet, il y a très peu de femmes qui vont vers le bureau pour s'enregistrer, pour avoir leur brevet. C'est quasiment inexistant. Hein. Il y a eu un seul dépôt en 2015 et depuis, il n'y en a pas eu d'autres. Bon, pour ce qui concerne la marque, par contre, il y a beaucoup de femmes, une dizaine, à peu près 10% de femmes qui enregistrent leur marque. Et ces marques-là concernent les produits agroalimentaires locaux ou importés, aussi des textiles, hein, des vêtements et des bassines en aluminium. Pour ce qui concerne la marque, et surtout je veux aller sur le domaine des textiles, vous savez que les femmes entrepreneurs ici, surtout les revendeuses des tissus, que nous appelons communément les nanabes, ont ce problème. C'est-à-dire qu'avant, elles avaient des dessins de pagne qu'elles avaient et qu'elles commandaient à Visco. Et on leur avait demandé à l'époque, il y a très, très longtemps, de protéger leur invention. Mais ce qui s'est passé, c'est que comme elles ne l'ont pas fait, les mêmes femmes entrepreneurs, ce qui fait les jeunes maintenant, ont pris ces dessins, sont partis en Chine et ils ont fait des copies. Ce qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, il y a un problème autour de cela. Et à chaque fois qu'il y a un nouveau dessin qui sort, le mois qui suit, automatiquement, la copie se fait, mais dans une qualité inférieure. Et tout ça, c'est des problèmes parce que c'est des problèmes de pauvreté qui amènent cela. Parce qu'on veut le même dessin.
Okay, I think unfortunately we've lost the connection with Candide, so I hope she will be able to join us again soon. In the meantime, let's continue with the presentation, and voilà, j'aimerais inviter Fania à prendre la parole et partager son expérience. Et on verra si Candide arrive à nous rejoindre plus tard de nouveau. Merci. Yes, Fania, the floor is yours.
Oui, allô? Oui, j'avais perdu encore la connexion, mais j'ai pris mon
On vous
portable.
retrouve.
Bon, donc ça va. Est-ce que vous m'entendez là?
Oui.
Bon,
Oui, on vous entend.
Bon?
On vous entend, oui, oui.
Ok, d'accord. Je disais que les jeunes entrepreneurs aujourd'hui vont beaucoup vers l'OAPI, l'IMPIT au Togo, ça fait et surtout aussi leur marque de service qui est en avance dans ce qui tout
Candide, on ne vous entend pas de nouveau. Est-ce que vous nous entendez? Alors, I think we're going to continue with Fania's presentation because unfortunately the connection is really bad. That's really, really a shame. Yes, but for the interest of time, I think we need to move on. Fania.
Merci Daphné. Alors, Fanza Razakaboun, je suis présidente du groupement des femmes entrepreneurs de Madagascar. Comme présenté tout à l'heure, je ne vais pas trop m'étaler, mais je suis là surtout pour partager un peu l'expérience des femmes entrepreneurs à Madagascar de manière générale, mais surtout des expériences de nos membres qui ont déjà fait recours au service de l'organisation malgache, l'Office malgache pour la protection intellectuelle. Alors, moi, j'ai pu avoir des retours d'informations avec l'Office malgache de la propriété intellectuelle. La direction générale est également une femme, donc elle était quand même assez sensible au sujet. Selon les informations qui m'ont été communiquées, a priori, donc, à Madagascar, la propriété intellectuelle est composée de deux branches. On a la propriété littéraire et artistique, la propriété littéraire et artistique et la propriété industrielle. La propriété industrielle qui nous concerne un peu plus regroupe donc notamment des signes distinctifs, des marques, des noms commerciaux, des indications géographiques. On a aussi les aspects esthétiques et ornementaux, les dessins et des modèles industriels, et les aspects techniques et fonctionnels, donc les inventions. Ce sont des actifs immatériels dont la protection se traduit par l'acquisition de droits exclusifs d'exploitation par leurs titulaires. Je tiens à rappeler que l'Office malgache de la propriété intellectuelle est rattaché au ministère de l'Industrie, du Commerce et de l'Artisanat à Madagascar. C'est donc une organisation étatique qui fonctionne sous la tutelle du ministère. Les démarches relatives à la protection se résument donc à Madagascar au dépôt de demande d'enregistrement auprès de cet organisme national, mais il y en a aussi dans les régions, tout en sachant que Madagascar est composé de 24 régions et 6 provinces. On a 25 millions de population. Sur l'entrepreneuriat en soi, 25% des entreprises sont dirigées par les femmes. La protection intellectuelle en découle donc en étant de portée territoriale. Si on regarde un peu un aperçu des femmes et des entités dans l'OMAPI, donc l'Office malgache pour la propriété intellectuelle, à connaissance de leur direction par des femmes qui ont déposé leurs actifs auprès de l'OMAPI, on peut voir que la promotion des innovations entreprises par les femmes par l'Organisation mondiale de la propriété intellectuelle et l'adhésion de Madagascar à cette cause à travers l'OMAPI, notamment par la remise de récompenses et de reconnaissances à l'endroit des femmes titulaires de titres de propriété industrielle auprès de l'OMAPI à l'occasion du 20e anniversaire de l'Office en 2014. Alors, j'ai quelques données en chiffres que je pourrais partager aussi à Laura, à l'équipe de l'ITC et de l'Office mondial pour la propriété intellectuelle. Je ne vais pas trop m'étaler là-dessus, mais je pense ce qui est intéressant par la suite, c'est de vous partager un petit peu les vécus et les expériences sur le terrain de ces entreprises dirigées par nos membres et de manière générale. Les femmes entrepreneurs et la protection intellectuelle, je ne dis pas que ce sont deux choses bien distinctes, mais selon l'OMAPI, en tout cas en référence chez eux et aux échanges dans le cadre de l'événement qui a été organisé Women in Industry and Innovation, qui a été organisé au mois dernier, en juillet, il a été soulevé que la réalité est à peu près la même partout dans le monde, mais également à Madagascar, c'est-à-dire que l'inégalité du genre qui sévit et qui emmène souvent les femmes à hésiter d'intégrer le monde de l'entrepreneuriat de manière générale, avec toutes les barrières que nous connaissons. Madagascar n'est pas un pays exclu des autres pays africains. C'est un combat de tous les jours que nous menons et aussi à Madagascar. Et l'approche vers l'Office malgache de la propriété intellectuelle est encore vraiment un autre challenge. On a noté aussi que les campagnes de sensibilisation entreprises par l'Office malgache de la propriété intellectuelle ne font aucune distinction apparemment entre les genres et l'adhésion de l'Office à la politique et aux stratégies définies par l'État non plus. Toutes ces informations-là, je les ai recueillies avec la Direction générale de l'Office malgache pour la propriété intellectuelle. Maintenant, en ce qui concerne la réalité, les intentions de l'Office, de l'État et du gouvernement malgache, et toute autre chose. Je pense qu'il y a vraiment une méconnaissance. Alors ici, à 3 niveaux. Le premier niveau, c'est vraiment la méconnaissance de manière générale de l'importance de la propriété intellectuelle à Madagascar. Lara a déjà expliqué un petit peu tout à l'heure. Vraiment, là, il y a une méconnaissance de l'importance de cette démarche. Une fois qu'elles créent leur entreprise, avant même qu'elles créent leur entreprise, elles savent déjà quels produits elles veulent lancer, quel type de brevet elles souhaiteraient mettre en avant. Mais la démarche et le pas vers la formalisation de tout ça est encore un autre défi. Et parmi nos membres, il y a quand même quelques-unes qui ont fait la démarche. Mais ce qu'elles ressentent au plus profond d'elles, c'est que celles qui sont déjà au courant, on va dire, font la démarche, c'est quand même assez coûteux. Et dans notre pays, il y a quand même on va dire, un manque d'accompagnement. Il n'y a pas de plateforme digitalisée qui va les accompagner. Il n'y a pas de retour pour celles qui ont fait l'effort. Pour celles qui ne connaissent pas, il n'y a pas suffisamment de sensibilisation, de mobilisation. Mais celles qui ont fait l'effort, il n'y a aucune protection finalement, il n'y a pas d'accompagnement. Donc ça, ce sont des défis auxquels nous, on fait face ici à Madagascar. Déjà, en termes de promotion de l'entrepreneuriat féminin, particulièrement, il y a déjà un défi que je mène tous les jours. Mais aujourd'hui, en ce qui concerne la protection intellectuelle, soit celles qui ne rentrent pas dedans se disent on n'est pas vraiment au courant, à quoi ça sert, soit celles qui ont fait le pas disent oui, on a fait, mais finalement, ça nous sert strictement à rien. On perd du temps, on perd de l'argent, mais finalement, pour rien. Si demain, il y a une autre entreprise concurrente qui copie leur marque, leur brevet, leur nom, elles ne sont pas finalement aussi bien protégées que cela. Donc, en ce qui concerne la propriété intellectuelle, finalement, elles ne se sentent pas vraiment protégées malgré qu'il y a ce office-là. Alors, il y a un travail peut-être à faire qu'on pourrait recommander, c'est de voir une sensibilisation particulière personnalisée pour ces femmes. Les Malgaches sont très affluentes à la recherche de tout ce qui est approche un peu plus personnalisée. Si au niveau de l'Office mondial de la propriété intellectuelle, l'ITC, les démarches que vous menez aujourd'hui, on pourrait travailler sur un projet spécifique au pays, à Madagascar. Comment est-ce qu'on pourrait mieux les sensibiliser, mieux les protéger? Est-ce qu'il y a un travail aussi en parallèle à faire avec l'État pour que ces femmes-là puissent se sentir un peu plus sécurisées et surtout pour dire c'est important de sécuriser votre marque, votre nom, votre brevet parce qu'il y a vraiment d'une part une méconnaissance et de l'autre part un manque de sécurité totale pour celles qui font déjà la démarche pour protéger leur marque et leur nom. L'État, pour nous, puisque c'est une organisation rattachée à l'État, est là pour protéger les entreprises, le secteur privé, et particulièrement celles dirigées par les femmes, puisque c'est le sujet dont on parle aujourd'hui. Pour ces femmes-là, il n'y a pas suffisamment de rôle que l'OMAPI, pour l'instant, joue particulièrement. Alors, c'est vrai, leur démarche disent pareil, que ce soit une entreprise dirigée par un homme ou pour une femme, mais on sait très bien que les entreprises dirigées par les femmes ont besoin de plus de particularités, sinon on ne lutterait pas pour la promotion de l'entrepreneuriat féminin de manière générale. Donc il y a vraiment un challenge, un travail en amont au niveau de l'État, un travail au sein avec vous, les partenaires techniques et financiers, des experts qui sont déjà sur le sujet, et nous, en tant qu'association régionale, qui connaissons très bien quelles sont les barrières sur le terrain, qu'est-ce qui les bloque, pourquoi celles qui font le pas finalement se redressent, parce que dans le tableau qu'on a reçu, très peu d'entreprises dirigées par les femmes vont vers l'office, mais celles qui ont déjà déposé, finalement, elles sont rétractées, elles ne sont pas renouvelées les paiements pour protégés à long terme. Donc, cette méconnaissance de la mission, des rôles de l'Office, ça c'est une évidence. Je pense qu'au Madagascar n'est pas le seul pays à être dans cet état, mais il y a vraiment un travail de synergie à faire et je pense que l'initiative peut venir aussi du côté de partenaires techniques et financiers comme l'ITC et l'Office mondial pour la propriété intellectuelle. Voilà ce que je peux en tirer. Il y a beaucoup de choses à dire, mais étant donné que la plupart des entreprises dirigées par les femmes de manière générale à Madagascar, mais surtout dans notre association, sont des toutes petites, des micro-entreprises, petites et moyennes. Il y en a quelques-unes qui sont déjà de taille à un niveau international et même au niveau national. Mais déjà, ce n'est pas une priorité, ce n'est pas un réflexe chez elles d'aller vers la protection intellectuelle. Il y a d'abord tous les autres capitaux qu'il faut mettre en avant, mais aussi il y a mes connaissances et puis celles qui font quand même le pas parce qu'elles ont une vision beaucoup plus longue de leur marque et de leur business, ben finalement elles se disent mais ça sert finalement pas vraiment à rien. Voilà. Merci beaucoup. Merci pour cette invitation.
Merci beaucoup, Fania, and thank you to all three of you, our speakers, and for your contributions about the experiences of your associations and your members. This is extremely useful to get a good sense of the situation out there, and I think it really signals the need for additional awareness raising and raising awareness about all the opportunities, really. I think some of the things that have been highlighted and a few things that came up in the questions and answers box are really the fact that securing IP rights, registering IP rights can be costly. And Lara had mentioned that this is really a deterrent in many situations. And also one of the obstacles is the lack of knowledge as to how to go about it, really. And it can seem daunting, you know, okay, I'm going to register a patent, but that seems really complicated. You know, where do I go? Who do I ask? What do I need to, you know, what documents do I need, and how much is it going to cost, let alone if you want to register on international markets. But like Lara was saying, what if you don't, you know? Yes, it may seem like kind of like an uphill mountain to climb, but there can really be a lot of benefits to carefully considering and choosing the right IP rights for your business and actually working on that and actually getting those rights. Now we have a few questions that came, a few other questions that came from the Q&A box. Hopefully we'll have time to answer a few, but I would just like to give Lara the opportunity to quickly react, perhaps briefly, to the three experiences that we've just heard.
Thanks, Daphne. Unfortunately, I omitted to put on my translation when the lady when Madame Candide was speaking, but I kind of got the gist of what she was saying, to do with textiles, if I'm correct. I think it's one thing, as I think it was Ms. Kujo who said, it's one thing to protect, it's another thing to actually know, you know, and then ensure that what you're protecting is valuable. A lot of business women on the continent, like the example we had, would go into business with anyone. For instance, you show up at an exhibition with your product without any form of registration. That is a big no-no. Even if it means that you do a collective as an association, if you do a collective, or you know, just ensure that something is registered. It's I know it's expensive, but you know, it's really, I don't want to say it, but penny wise, pound foolish, like you say. You don't want to save this and then lose more. especially if you're going to Asia, if you're going to China to produce, and I know that a lot of us go off to Asia. If we go to, you're free for all. It's expensive, but you can find out if you do your research with your women organization. I think that's where the business associations come into play. Engage IP attorneys and ask for. I mean, there's so many firms and businesses and organizations who are looking to build bridges with women associations, who will be able to give you the basic information that by the time you show up to your attorney, you're going with information. They know you've done your homework, so it doesn't cost them so much. It doesn't take so long to effect your registration, if you see what I mean. So rather than going in green and showing up, I want to patent something, really, as an association, perhaps you need to, I don't know how many associations have IP units. Do they actually exist in there? Do you have people, members who can either engage attorneys to come and give you talks during your conferences, at least create that awareness. That's important. I liked what Madam Fanza said about if you don't know to protect. You just want to sell whatever you want to sell. If you said somebody, or you have to do intellectual property, blah, blah, blah. Look, the first answer we get is, it's my name. He's my distributor. I'm his supplier. How is he going to get me out of the market? So the business sense, general business education, I think is very important. And knowledge is key. Why protect? The example we give all the time is, if you invested into prime property, you would protect. See your brand. So it's raining here. See your brand, see your trademark, see your invention as property. See it as something that you can hand over to your children. See it as legacy. Don't see it as, oh, I'm just giving this lawyer money. If you have copyright in something, it's your lifetime plus 50 years after, if it's sound, if it's something written, artistic, a drawing, a sculpture, it is 70 years after you have that your children, your grandchildren will benefit from it. Your trademark is yours forever if, as we were told during the talk, if you keep the standards up. The issue of exposing all your processes. There's a question here about your process flow and all of that. You don't need to do that. There's certain steps. For instance, if it's a food and beverage in Nigeria, you have to have registration before you can get to NAFDAC. By the time you get to NAFDAC, you present a registration or an application saying, I have a pending application. A lot of the investigation is taken up, so you have a right to that mark. I think the challenge we have, from what I can gather, is we just need to speak to one another more. Speak to one another more. Get that information out to the business associations. Business associations reach out to other, there are so many international organizations who are looking to give this information really for nothing. They will use their volunteers. So, but ultimately, when it comes to the bread and butter, you have to engage somebody to assist you. But by the time you arrive there, I think if you have the information, then you are in a better place.
Many thanks, Lara, for these excellent comments. I think that we are already running over time, unfortunately, and this is really sad for me because there's so many questions that are coming in, and some are quite specific. Like, for example, how do you register textile, or what happens, like in specific industries and so on. And I think it's great that these questions are coming in. Unfortunately, we won't have necessarily the time to answer them today, but it means that this webinar actually achieves to raise your curiosity and to encourage the participants to hopefully look into these things and try and really consider IP rights as an option, as an opportunity, actually. I think in terms of like a few brief concluding comments, I think that this webinar managed to raise awareness on these issues, but this really the start of the process, because it's something that is ongoing, and I do hope that for the women business associations present with us today, they will have the possibility and the opportunity to then continue these discussions with their members. One key message that I would reiterate from Lara's presentation would be that we saw that there are a number of different types of IP rights, and they all operate according to different rules. So you need to be clever about this and actually not get IP rights for the sake of getting IP rights, but thinking about what are your company's intellectual assets, what are these types of intellectual assets, and then really make an informed decision as to what is the appropriate IP rights to protect these specific IP assets. And here we're not saying only protect so that you can benefit commercially, but also protect yourself from third parties who may want to, copy or misappropriate your excellent ideas and expressions of these ideas. So the IP strategy is really, really key. And I'm sure that there are, bodies or organizations or people you can consult to make sure that you're on the right track, as to you identify the right IP right for your business. Yes. And one thing perhaps that we didn't mention so much, and that could be relevant in the context that we live in now with the pandemic and the difficulty sometimes to trade in person, is e-commerce. And I'd just like to raise awareness to the fact that when you do e-commerce and you put things online, you put things out there, be careful what you're putting online. And you also need to have an IP strategy for those assets, not only the goods that you're going to try and make available online, but your name that would go on the web page, would go on the domain name, and so on. So protect yourself, your name, your goods, and try and think really of all the different components to an IP strategy. Now, with those few concluding remarks, I would like to, on behalf of Van Wendland and myself, to thank our co-host, the ITC, to thank GIZ, to thank our amazing speaker, Lara, and the three amazing ladies who also share their experience with us today, Candide, Fania, and Korkor. Thank you all warmly. I hope you all, to our participants, thank you for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed this webinar and that there will be other opportunities to continue these discussions.
Hello, everyone. Before we end the call, I would just like to launch a poll, if that's okay. And if you don't mind answering, it will pop up on your screen in just 1 second. So I see that some of the answers are coming in. Thank you time to answer these two questions. It's really important for us to make sure that we're delivering content that is relevant to all of you, and also to remain accountable to our donors. So we appreciate you taking the time, and thank you for attending today, and thank you, Ms. Daphne, as well.
Thank you. Okay, so goodbye, everyone.
Hello, Daphne.
Hello.
Thank you very much for moderating the session.
No, thank you. I think it went well. It was very. I thought it was a good